And we already started our Fireside Chat backstage. But we were thinking about how to introduce ourselves, and we will kind of set the roles. I'm playing the role of an actually crypto outsider. So I'm not native crypto, and I just recently got to know about Web3 probably in the last 2-3 years. But my major is the brain, and I give talks about why our brains are wired to connect and what role AI and Web3 will play here. So we were talking about the same topic, whereas Yat is a visionary and pioneer in the field already. So we are coming from an insider point of view and outsider point of view. And today we want to ask a few big questions, which might be more philosophical, but it's about how the world is changing currently and what role can Web3 play in this changing world. So did I introduce it right yet?
You did. And I think it was, for me, it was a bit of a surprise when I heard that you're going on stage talking about brain science and sort of, as a neuroscientist. So I think some very interesting topics here. I wouldn't count myself necessarily as a crypto insider in the sense that we came in from the lens from NFTs back in 2017, 2018. So in relative ways, we are sort of maybe early in one way, but still late in another way, right? Because there's obviously many people in the audience who have been there, longer there, but it's evolved from that. And I think it's exciting to see. And I think maybe hopefully in this conversation, and what I hope we can carry forward is how do we translate what Web3 really means and what blockchain really means for the world and what it means for people who are not in the space. Because despite the fact that obviously, especially the last 3 or 4 months has been very good for our industry, the amount of adoption that's taken place is still relatively small. And how do we bring more people on board, I think, comes down to sort of having a deeper understanding as to why it's so important.
So let me start from an alien point of view as a brain scientist, how I think we came here. So it's going to be kind of a big history, but I'll try to do it in 1 minute. So our brains are still the same as our brains were 50,000 years ago. So we have the same hardware, but we are doing different things with our brain. And how did it evolve like that? So you had verbal language connecting us, then you had written language, and then we came to the digital world where we have internet and smartphones to connect each other. And now we have AI, which learns all the information online, and we can interact with AIs. And then we have the metaverse, open metaverse, a spatial web too. So that means everything we know and how we earn money and how we do things is not dependent on our biological hardware, but it is more dependent on what kind of system we build to connect people with each other. And I think it is my personal belief that the structures the world had, for example, democracy or how companies or nations survive and make their money, I think the system is at a point where it is crumbling and we need a new system. And I think in this new system order, in this new world order, blockchain, Web3, crypto will be very important to be the building blocks in sketching a new system how to connect people. I mean, we have a few things already going on. For example, AI can do most of the things people do. It draws pictures, does design, it codes programming languages. That means one thing is obvious. If everything can be copied from an AI side, how are you going to prove who you are? And how will you prove your worth? That means you have to prove your identity, you have to prove your worth, and there is currently no better system than what is already there in the Web3 world. So I think automatically with AI copying everything and the way we work and earn money, when that changes, that world has to connect with Web3. This is like my belief from an outsider point of view, and I'm not so familiar with the Web3 world and everything, but I think the world has to go there. But I think not everyone is seeing that. So at a conference like BUIDL, I think one big question is, what kind of system, community connections do we want to build, and how can we convince others who don't see that big change coming of the value what the Web3 world has? So that was my point of view. And yeah, what do you think about this?
Well, I mean, just to add this one, and again, I'm not a neuroscientist, right? But when I just look at the sort of evolution of technology, I've been basically engaged in the sort of, I guess, internet space or pre-internet space since the 80s. I'm totally dating myself, right? My first computer that I used for work was an Atari ST. My first computer was a Texas Instrument TI-99. But I think, when you think about the evolution of the internet, actually, it just amplified what we were already as people, which is social. We're basically social creatures in one form or the other. And as time evolved, whether it was, the way that we share sort of our social nature is through stories. And the first generations of these stories were verbal. So we created verbal stories. These became lore. They became our mythology. They became our belief systems. And that's how we connected societies together, right? And whether you call this a political system, whether you call this religion, whatever it is, we were tied to these stories. And as you said, the written word was another way to cement that. Because now, when you tell a story, the story changes and changes and changes. But actually, when you had the written word, it could stay. But for a long time, the written word was only delivered by handwriting, right? And so only a very small number of people had the knowledge of that written word and had the ability to pass down that knowledge and therefore had more ability than others. And then you had the Gutenberg press and you had the printing press, which basically democratized that. And I would say that was probably one of the first big pivotal changes. It was technology that actually just enabled us to be more social with each other. And it allowed societies to also become larger. So today we have societies that have millions and millions of people in one group. That wasn't possible before because we didn't have a way in which we could keep our records and so forth. And I think one of the other big innovations that created another sort of story was money. Money is a social construct. Money is not a sort of, I guess, specific asset in the traditional sense that we think of, because after all, a monkey would not trade, money for a banana because you can't eat it, right? In that sense, right? Money is something that we told ourselves was a story that made sense, created the ability to have social connections, and then expand to global trade. And trade is perhaps from an economical standpoint, one of the most sort of social connections that we had with each other. Between the relationship that we have with money, you could think of money, and in that sense, by extension in Web3 with tokens, as essentially a credit-debt relationship with your partner, whether it's two humans, whether it's a company, whether it's an individuals, different groups, right? It is a relationship of that sort. And in the same way that we ourselves rank ourselves socially, money has become also a proxy for our social status. Do you have more money? Do you have less money? And is it the money that you have relative to what you have in your environment, right? So again, we rank ourselves socially. When you think about the next level of that, you talk about NFTs, for instance. Why is a Bored Ape $60,000 or $80,000, for instance, right? Well, why is a Rolex watch $20,000, $30,000? Like, we don't buy a Rolex watch to tell the time. You don't buy a Birkin bag to store stuff in it. They all become proxies of an economic value as well, which is translated through money. Right, so all of this becomes social stories that are tied to it, and I think tokenization is a perfect example in Web3 how we can now extend these stories. So maybe just going a little bit more degen in nature. For instance, when you think about meme coins, which I guess depending on what the industry you're in, love them or hate them, I would say that meme coins actually represent another form of social culture, another form of extension. In this case, where we tell our own stories. Because money, in some ways, at least historically, has been a story that was told to us. And we just accepted it.
Right.
Because that's what we were taught. But now in Web3, when we talk about this whole sort of liberalist freedom thinking, sort of self-sovereign identity, now we have the ability to tell our own stories. And nobody said, by the way, whether this meme coin or that token or this token will be the predominant system in the world. We don't know that. That's like saying, is the American democratic system 500 years ago or 400 years ago the preeminent political system, for instance, right? That was an experiment. America is the biggest democratic experiment still in existence, and many countries in the world have tried to emulate that system and have failed, actually, right, to follow that way. So just to sort of close on this one, I would say that, again, these are stories we tell ourselves, and the way that we succeed is how we bring people to share in that common story and share a common reality.
And it's funny because if you tell stories, the brain's machinery tries to simulate exactly that. It's called neural coupling. So if I'm saying something and you are saying something, but we think about the same thing. In the same moment, the whole brain and the neurons fire synchronously. It's very amazing. And we try to simulate each other's thoughts. That means the stories are kind of, in a way, building a blockchain, we can also say. So my stories go to yours, and it builds another line of chains, and it goes on and goes on.
Yeah.
But going back to the idea of money, and we looked at the history and connected to the Web3 world, there's another famous meme coin from Erica, a social token. You have Erica coin, right? Erica token. But that was a really interesting
Not
idea.
financial advice.
Financial.
Not financial. But so as a professor, as someone, I write books, I give lectures, and I earn my money mostly to that. But I think very soon it's going to change, because I'm not going to sell book by book or people pay money to go into my lecture. I think it will change, like I will just bring out my coin, my token or social token. And if someone thinks his stories are worth it, then they can become shareholders. They will be holders of my token, and I will send out books like I do airdrops, right? So in this way, probably the way we earn money or we sell things is going to change very fast, because with the emergence of AI, and the AI can copy me, it can copy almost all my thoughts or how I write books, right? That means I have to first prove it is my idea, the original data and everything is coming from me. But also, if someone can copy it and sell the same books, I mean, the book market is already going down, but it is not the way how I can now earn money. That means later, if someone really wants the same knowledge or go into the lecture, I think people will go into the idea of buying my token, becoming shareholders, and then we build a new connection or community. If someone thinks there's a smarter or prettier brain scientist, then they can sell my token and go to someone else. But in this way, I think in the emerging AI world, the way we do transactions, the way we prove what our worth is, will go together with identification, identity, and also money. And this is kind of, I found it interesting, this idea already exists in the Web3 world, but it is not so commonly adopted yet.
One of the things that a lot of people had difficult, when we first started doing NFTs in 2017, 2018, a lot of people struggled, especially actually in the Web3, or back then, I guess, blockchain crypto world natively, because of the fact that you somehow could just, copy and download the JPEG, right? That was sort of the joke. Oh, I just take the JPEG, I download it, and I basically have it. What's so valuable about it? But what you're not purchasing is the actual image itself. What you're purchasing is the authentic ownership of something from a person that matters, right? In the same way that if you take a photo of the Mona Lisa at the Louvre, that doesn't mean that the Mona Lisa is worthless now. In fact, the fact that millions of people have taken photos of the Mona Lisa and have made the Mona Lisa famous makes the original, the authentic one, from Leonardo da Vinci, valuable as a result. And so for the same reason, I would buy Erica coin, not financial advice, because I want to have an authentic relationship with her. I don't want to, someone could make a copy and call it Erica coin too, or, whatever, right? But right? However, that wouldn't enable me to have a relationship with her directly, for instance. And I think that's the difference between Web 2 and Web 3. Musicians can't make money on Spotify, even though they have, 1 million or 10 million followers, because the musician actually doesn't have a relationship with the artist. He also doesn't know whether the artist has, whether the listener listens to the music 10,000 times or just one time. So it's kind of all mixed. And so what we have is that, data and the value of the network effects belongs to the platform in Web 2. And they essentially have become the biggest arbitrage, I guess, data knowledge arbitrage of our information in those Web 2 platforms. And they extract all the value. So we don't know what they actually make. But in Web 3, it becomes transparent, right? So, to your question on AI, I think this is where it's really more important, because I want to have the authentic information from the authentic person, right? Even if the AI sort of copies the data, I'm willing to pay a premium for something that comes from you or from someone else that I respect, in the same way that you want to have a direct relationship. Because again, we go back to sort of our human relationships. It's social, right? And so to have a really strong social connection, you want to have an authentic connection. To have an authentic connection is to show provenance of an ownership or relationship. And so money in the past has been a way to do that because, as I said earlier, it is like a credit debt relationship. So if you pass out a token of mine, I'm actually creating a sort of almost a liability in terms of that relationship. And then I have to earn basically sort of, I guess, the value of that relationship in some ways, right? Because, and I don't mean to say it has to be money terms. Like even a relationship of whether it's a partner or if you get married or, whatever, it's still an investment. And I don't mean to say it's an investment in money sense, but it's an investment of your time, right? And that's actually, I think, what these social relations come through. But I just want to cover one area as well, which is there are stories when we talk about this, whether they're represented through meme coins or, through Erica coins or whatever it is, right? Is that there are stories that somehow we share a commonality around, right? And those become the things that change the world. So the idea, for instance, when Locke first talked about our natural rights as having property rights, that idea did not exist for the common person. It's not that new of an idea. It's if you think about it, it's 400 years or 300, 400 years old. Conceptually speaking, it's like a baby in the evolution of human history. But that idea was one that, when people heard it, would not give up on. Right? Oh, I should own my property. That means something to me. But again, owning your property is actually a story, right? I mean, often we're argued around, oh, I own this house because it's made of bricks. You don't own the house because it's of bricks. You own the house because there's a government that is stable, that ensures and guarantees the ownership of that house. If that government goes away, you lose that house as well. So the ownership is actually virtual too. But the idea is so powerful that you will do everything you can to maintain that ownership. And that's also why most people would prefer democratic systems, because the idea that we want to live in a democratic system rather than an autocratic one, even though you could argue that an autocratic system is much more efficient, it's faster, and all that kind of stuff, and yet somehow we choose to live in a less efficient, more chaotic democratic system because that idea is more powerful. So I don't think it's always just related about efficiency.
Right. And I think it will become even more chaotic, and we will see actually more isolated groups in the future, as we see with wars going on in the world. And I think it's a system issue, because you can build a system in such a way that people get more value out of it by sharing stories and connecting. But sometimes it builds just groups and become islands. Vitalik and we had a fireside chat. Ilya, had a talk right before, and I remember 2 points Vitalik mentioned was we need to, in the near future, more connections. And it is interesting because when I saw the soul-bound token idea, at the end, that system cannot exist without community guardians, because you need people proving each other at the end if you put everything into an SBT, right? So similarly, who I am and how I get my skills and who I am doesn't arise in myself with all the data of the world. That's what many people think when they think of a computer. But from a brain scientist point of view, it comes with connections. That means, who do I meet, from whom I learn, in which community do I raise? That makes myself, right? So going back to Web3, I think, and the money issue, I think biology and brain will eventually merge with the Web3 world, that everything I do and I think and my data also biologically will in some way, it has to become a kind of a token to prove who I am. But that kind of system cannot work if you don't have others who believe in the same system and connect with each other. So in a way, I think in the future we will have different kind of systems as we had communism and democracy. But I think from a technological point of view, those kind of nations and ideologies don't matter so much anymore. It's more about in which kind of connecting system do you believe more? Is it a centralized system, like, for example, China is aiming, where online and offline is every there? Or do you aim a more chaotic, but a decentralized system where everyone owns their own data, biologically and also digitally, but have a new system to connect with each other? And I think the former one, we already see nations or big tech companies working towards, but the latter one, having a completely more chaotic, decentralized way of connected community, is probably existing in the crypto community, but that kind of idea or system worldwide is not existing so much. But I think we need a new way, which brings the technology to build a new system to connect brains. I mean, now we are mixing up politics and money and everything.
Yes.
But
But politics and money and brain are all part of our social stories. So I think it's all connected anyway. And maybe to riff a little bit on what you said, I would argue that all the birth of nations and the birth of sort of civilizations from the history into where we are today is an element of shared stories, right? So, Korea has its own unique story. You have your own culture that is emerged in a certain manner. And that culture is not totally American, nor is it totally Chinese, or nor is it, whatever we're influenced, but you were influenced from those regions, and therefore you have your own community, and you have a shared value that comes from that community. And that's not that easily exportable. We have immigrants, they go around the world, and they then spread those ideas, and you have Chinatowns and Koreatowns around the world as a result of that, but still, the pocket of that story is owned by that. And I think the token is an interesting representation of that, because what you have as a nation, in the same way that you have as a token, is a representation of that network effect, right? So to me, society, nationalism, patriotism is actually a form of a network, and that network is representative of the network effect that you can partake in, for instance, right? So I think now with tokenization, though, we have the ability to branch out multiple of these ideas, of which some will succeed and become big ideas and have larger networks, and some will die and maybe most will die because they're fringe ideas and they don't have an ability to extend beyond their small community. But that's okay, right? Because I also think that's really exciting, because right now in these systems, we can iterate with democratic ideals, for instance, like with DAOs, that we couldn't really do in the physical world, because you can't really experiment on democracies that easily, because if you screw up, it's pretty disastrous, right? But you can experiment on DAOs. When they, if they fail, maybe it's expensive, but it's not that bad. Because not that many people get affected in comparison, right? And I think some ideas are prevailing. Like, for instance, capitalism is generally prevailed over communism, as an example, right? And we understand why, because we still prefer to have our property rights, and we prefer that there is an incentive to bring us somewhere, because as humans, we're also socially connected. I just want to add one other thing, which is, I think the most expensive thing for a human is to be disconnected socially, right? That's why we have a prison. Right? Why do you go to prison? Right? That to me isn't just a case. It's the sentencing is isolation. Why is isolation painful? Because we're separated from society. So that social suicide is more costly to us than almost anything else. So a token is a way to combine that network too. I mean, for instance, for those of you who have NFT collections and you had to sell them, or you hear the stories, so often people have to apologize why they sell their NFTs. They're like, oh, I have to sell the NFT because my grandma needs some help. I have to send my kids through to school. And you don't have to explain it. Actually, why do you have to explain it? But they feel compelled to do so because they're leaving that community. They're leaving that society. It's like if you leave Korea, for instance, and you move somewhere else, you kind of have to explain yourself. But again, why would you have to, right? Normally speaking, right? And why is it so difficult for someone to move from one country to another country, even if the other country has better prospects? When there were revolutions, or, the Cultural Revolution in China, which is, I guess, background of some of my parents, right, is many of them didn't leave, even though they could see that it was disaster, because the idea of moving somewhere else where you could be socially isolated was so expensive relative to being in a place where danger was very clearly there, but actually social suicide was perhaps even more costly in their mind. And we see this in history time and time again.
Right. And I think we go back to how AI and Web3 will transform how we think about ourselves. And I think with AI, we have two roads. One is AI is so powerful that you don't need any other humans anymore. You can be in your room, you can create everything, you can meet people online probably, but you learn everything, you can create everything. That means you will probably have even more isolation in a way. That's one road which is possible, right? And if you look at the statistics and numbers worldwide, actually isolation, loneliness, and that is increasing, and social connections are decreasing, especially after COVID-19. And that trend is still there. And it goes together with a huge problem in mental health. On the other hand, you can use AI to create systems where you discover new ideas, you are creating new connections with new people worldwide with whom you never thought you would connect. And you can use it to create more connections. And I think when you do that, you need a safe system to be able to prove who you are, and you need to know who is trustable. That means at the end, we need to increase connections where we can trust each other, have our freedom, and freely can interact with each other without someone stealing my identity. That is absolutely necessary and crucial.
Yes.
And since this is very crucial, I think when AI technology comes more into our lives, we need more of the Web3 ideas and more people in Web3 utilizing AI to create communities and connections. I think at the end, it's not about Bitcoin or Ethereum prices going up or being able to sell games or whatever. I think at the end, the big idea of Web3 is how can we create a new system and a new society where people can trust each other and we can freely interact with autonomy, owning everyone's data, and still create connections in a world where isolation is probably growing. So I somehow philosophically think of Web3 kind of as a shelter idea where this community building has a bigger value than it might appear to insiders just in the community.
So I would say that actually Web3 connects communities much more tighter than, and I think when you think about what Web3 enables you to do is authentic relationships. Although maybe it will not necessarily replace the physical connection you have when you're face to face, what it does do is prove that you really are who you are. So when, for instance, you look at, something like the Bored Apes as sort of the OG collection of representing that social NFT collection, when people go to Ape Fest, they don't know each other, but they all know they have a Bored Ape. And that means that there's an authenticity attached to the fact that I'm actually invested in that community. There is deeper meaning behind that. It's not some stranger in the world that pretends to have it, that basically says stuff or creates FUD or whatever. There's, that the person there is at least invested in the ecosystem. It's like talking to a true citizen, right? If someone has an opinion about your country and he's an actual citizen, you'll listen to him differently than from someone from the outside who, you don't know who he is and he just basically says stuff. That's one of the problems we have in the world. Well, social media in the Web 2 paradigm has enabled millions of people to sort of partake in the conversation, but they have no stake in it. And I think this is the other concept about blockchain in Web 3 that is powerful, is that, when you say proof of stake, we don't just mean that, you're staking something to prove the network. We're all nodes in our societies. We're actually proving our stake by having an investment in it, whether you own a house, whether you are owning an NFT, whether you have tokens, whether you're invested in the ecosystem. And the more you're invested in the ecosystem, the bigger your voice is. That's true in real life, and it's true in Web 3. So if I have a big stake, I'll listen to you differently because I know that you have something to lose. And that authentic relationship, that proof, can scale in blockchain, which it can't scale in Web 2 because who can prove, people don't go around basically showing their bank accounts, right, basically when they're in Web 2, nor their assets, nor do they want to, because they actually like the fact that they can act semi-anonymously, pretend who they are. I mean, you look at Instagram influencers, and then you see actually, maybe they're not doing quite as well because they took that photo next to that Ferrari that doesn't belong to them and they pretend, but they build audiences through that make-believe. That's not authentic. But if you actually know that he has these assets, your relationship with him will change, right? We follow people because we believe in their true stories, not in their fake stories. And I think, it doesn't matter how big AI will be. I think of it as an enabler, but blockchain will prove that you are sort of verified. And I think that's the big part. The authentic part is the key part.
Right. Absolutely agree. And the way we prove authenticity will probably change. It might even go biologically to some new degree, but I think that's the key, how you mentioned that.
Hopefully it won't be having to scan our eyeballs, but either way, it's certainly one way in which we can sort of add to our human proof of humanity, as it were.
Right. I think so. We are almost at the end of the talk. It was maybe a little bit philosophical, but I think the message we wanted to kind of talk about was we need new systems to create connections, and connections are crucial for the human brain as well as for human society.
Well, thank you so much. And I guess this is what happens when you go on stage with a neuroscientist. So thank you.
Thank you.